Hi, I wanted to talk about the glass castle essay that you have due this week. Let's just go ahead and dive in and look at the prompt together. Your prompt for this essay is it is a compare and contrast essay. You're going to write a 2-page paper answering the following questions. You will write your essay in MLA format, that is Times New Roman, 12-point font, double-spaced with an MLA heading. The prompt reads, "Life is hard for the Walls family wherever they go. However, in different places, it's hard in different ways. Compare and contrast. Talk about how they're similar and different. Their lives in Battle Mountain, Welch, and New York." You'll see in a minute we're going to flip over to my outline, and I did Battle Mountain, Phoenix, and Welch, and my questions were a little different too. I realized that I was taking all the good examples, so I tweaked your prompt a little bit. But you will spend some time answering these 3 questions. What are the family's basic living conditions like? What's the children's school experience? And discuss Rex's emotional condition as well. So you'll set up your essay where you'll have an intro, you'll have point 1, which is Battle Mountain, point 2, Welch, and point 3, New York. And in each of those places, you'll discuss the living conditions, the school experience, and Rex's emotional condition. And while you're talking about them, you're talking about how they're different and how they're similar from each other place. So let's look at now. I have an outline for you. I've attached this so you have first a blank outline, and you can see how I want you to set up your essay. You'll start with a thesis statement. That will be the last sentence of your intro paragraph. And then you have point 1, point 2, and point 3. So we've already talked about that. Should be Battle Mountain, Welch, and New York. Then in your conclusion, you'll recap everything that you've already talked about. So here is my example outline. My thesis is in the book, The Glass Castle. The Walls family lives in Battle Mountain, Phoenix, and Welch, and their lives in each place have similarities and differences in living conditions, Rosemary's emotional state, and Rex's emotional state. So you can tell that I'm going to be talking about the 3 locations, Battle Mountain, Phoenix, and Welch, and what I'm going to be talking about in those locations are the living conditions, Rosemary, and Rex, and how they're doing. I'm also going to be talking about how those things are similar and how they're different from each other. I've added a little bit more in my outline than I normally do. Normally my A and B would only be a word or a phrase, but I've given you a little bit more information here just so you have a really clear idea of what I would be talking about in each of these points. So I will have an A, B, and C for each of my points because I'm talking about 3 questions, right? Where the living conditions, Rosemary, and Rex. So I start in Battle Mountain and I talk about where they live, right? The house they live in is actually a rundown train depot. They don't have beds, they sleep in cardboard boxes. And there are several instances in this story where she talks about just kind of how their life is hard or how they don't have a lot of things or anything. You can use any of that as you're talking about it. This is just a 2-page paper, so you won't have time to talk about everything that you want to talk about in Battle Mountain. Just pick a few stories that highlight the point you're trying to make about that place that they're living. So then I go on to talk about Rosemary. Rosemary, Battle Mountain is the first place that she gets a job. So when Rex loses his job and the family starts spiraling into poverty more than normal, she gets a job teaching, and it talks about kind of how she feels about that. This is the first time that she gets a job teaching. And after this, when they move to Phoenix, she does not get a job teaching. You won't say that about Welch because she does get a job in Welch teaching, which she abandons. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But she does try when the family starts spiraling and Rex is spending less and less time at home, and when he is home, he's drunk. She does try to take care of the family. Of course, Lori ends up doing all of her work when she almost gets fired. And then the last thing we'll talk about is Rex. And I kind of start here by setting this pattern that happens often when they move to a new place. He'll get a job and everything is really working out well for the family for a little while, and then he loses his job, right? And things spiral out of control, and he's no longer at home, and he's not investing in the family, and then they leave. So that's kind of the pattern that I establish here. I do have some examples from the book about when he is hanging out with them. Something that also comes up when he is out of a job is that his dreams, his crazy dreams, kind of take forefront, and he talks about them more and makes loose plans for making them happen, like building the prospector and things like that. They just talk about them more when he doesn't have a job. I also want to see a transition sentence at the end of each point. A transition sentence just helps the reader move smoothly in your paper from point to point. The way I teach transition sentences is that I want you to have one foot in the point that you're completing and one point looking towards what you're about to talk about. Half the sentence talks about one half and half the sentence talks about the other half. So my transition sentence is, after the incident with a local boy and some gun used by the Wallace children, the Wallace family flees to Phoenix, where Rosemary has inherited her mother's house, right? So they finish up at Battle Mountain and they move to Phoenix, which is my next location. Okay, my topic sentence here, the sentence that says everything I'm going to talk about in this paragraph. The pattern displayed at Battle Mountain holds true again in Phoenix, and while Rex holds a job, everything goes well for the family again. Until it doesn't, right? Again, he loses his job and everything spirals more darkly out of control. But first, I talk about the living condition, right? The house that they live in. They drive up and they're like, wow, this is a mansion. And then they realize that it's totally eaten by termites, taken over by cockroaches. It's not a safe or really nice place to live, although it is significantly nicer than Battle Mountain or where they'll live in Welch later. Then we talk about Rosemary, right? She's largely happy here. She has places to paint and spread out all of her art supplies and things like that. Something that does happen special in Phoenix is Rex tries to give up drinking. So he goes through the whole detox, and Rosemary kind of walks through the family there. And then when things start to unravel here, instead of taking up a teaching job, she encourages the family to move back to Welch, Rex's home. So we talk about that. And then Rex, same pattern, right? Initially has a job, things are going well, loses his job, drinks more. This is a different spot because he does try to give up drinking, but then he takes back up the habit and they move. My next transition sentence, Rosemary moves the family to Welch, West Virginia, hoping the near next to Rex's family will help, but Welch proves to be the worst location for the family by far. And then my third point is Welch. Your third point, of course, will be New York, but you will talk about Welch. The family's living conditions, as well as Rosemary and Rex's emotional states, are worse in Welch. So talking about how this one is the worst of all. First of all, their house is worse, right? It's unsafe. There's holes in the ceiling. There are giant rats that live with them. There's no indoor plumbing. There's very little heating. It's just not a very good place, a safe place for them to be. Rosemary seems, like always, like a little bit oblivious to the plight of her children. Jeanette often highlights her selfishness in this section, like when she's sneaking chocolate, or when she decides to keep the ring that they could have pawned for some money, or when she starts teaching but then leaves for the summer to renew her teaching certificate and comes back and quits. So she does seem to be highlighting more in this section how Rosemary is very selfish. So that's different than the other sections where she kind of didn't talk about her quite as negatively. She also has a more negative perspective about her father by this point. Initially, when they moved to Welch, Brian is molested by Irma, and so the children kind of have a more clear idea of where their dad came from and perhaps why he is the way that he is, the decisions that he is making. But at the same time, he does several things, like when he spanks her for talking back to her mom, or when he takes her to the dangerous poker game, right, puts her in danger there, that she really becomes disillusioned with him as a father. So that change happens in Welch. And Rex feels that he never gets a job in Welch. This is not a happy place for him to be. And he isn't really happy or his version of healthy at any point during their stay in Welch. Really, the good days of the family are behind them at this point. And although the older children move off to New York and have relatively healthy lives there, the family unit is never together again. And the children do that for survival, really, for themselves. So that is what's different about Welch than the other places. So you can see there how you'll use examples from the text. If you do use examples from the text, you'll need to include a works cited page. But you can see that those examples, her own words, can kind of make things more powerful in the way that you're describing them. So that is our Glass Castle essay, and as you're working on it this week, let me know if you have any questions. You will submit the completed essay by next week and turn it in.